far too many accessories. Namaste.
Namaste.
So it's this Jesus magic carpet ride. His ascension into heaven. And it raises questions about, I think, miracles in general, and how do you interpret this? And I want to say right off the bat that you can interpret it any way you like, and that's fine with me. So that's all.
That's today's message.
And now, if the universe were fair, that toilet would have flushed just like it did at the end of the opening song. So what happened? So what happens? So do things like this happen? So what does it mean? Were they really standing there, and then Jesus all of a sudden started levitating and just, like, I have to share with you a tragic experience of my childhood that scars me to this day. Aaron will attest. 2 simple words: helium balloons. Helium balloons invoke so much anxiety in me, because my first memory of having a helium balloon was letting go of it behind my Nana and Grandpa's house, which was a Cape Cod, and watching it disappear into the sky over the apex of the house, just like Jesus at the Ascension. I mean, is that what it was? Was he just going, ooh? Or is it a story that's supposed to tell us something? And I think before you can fairly answer that question for yourself, you have to ask yourself, if things really happen that seem to defy the laws of nature, which is a different thing from saying that they really defy the laws of nature. In other words, the Old Testament story of the Battle of Jericho, where the sun stood still so the battle could continue for days, would have had cataclysmic consequences to our planet, because it would have meant that it had stopped spinning and orbiting the sun, which meant that there would have been no gravity, which would have meant that they would have been trying to fight floating somewhere off the ground, not unlike a helium balloon disappearing over the house or Jesus ascending into heaven. But that's another story. On the other hand, what about feeding 5,000? Well, some people say that everybody was carrying a little bread and a little fish in their pockets. And I want to say, in a desert climate, that would have smelled pretty bad indeed, and probably people would have caught on. Say, Bob, you smell just like cod. So for me, that's not the explanation for that. People like Padre Pio. And if you don't know who Padre Pio was, he was an Italian Capuchin priest who died in the 60s, 68, I want to say. And he had the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, and was highly regarded. They're coming. Is that the heavenly choirs? Is the toilet going to flush?
I'll go do that right now.
That was highly regarded as a spiritual director, and there were stories of him, what's called bilocating, appearing in 2 places at the same. I think that one's locked though, so you gotta let her in first. She's coming through. I think. Is that what it is? Yeah, I thought it was water. There's bilocating is appearing in 2 places at the same time, and there are documented cases of Padre Pio being both in his monastery in his church, and also being in another part of it, and for people who appear to otherwise be of sound mind and body. In our first 2 readings, we heard about cities, special powers that advanced spiritual practitioners develop. And we're not talking about Benny Hinn. Does everybody know who Benny Hinn is? He's the Hispanic faith healer whose hair looks like the frisbee has been sliced, or like somebody took a razor from the blade from a meat cutter and it went through his head like this. He has these big faith healing meetings, and they call people up front, and he goes like this. And if I was Benny Hinn, you all just would have rocked backwards out of your chairs.
Oh, Mr. Q.
Yeah, you missed it. Or I'm not Benny. One of the thanks be to God. But the problem with things like that, I think people sometimes really do fall down because they really believe he has those powers. And then sometimes they're standing up and somebody has a foot behind their heel. And sometimes what happens isn't too much similar, and I've been told this by people who have been trained in this sort of thing, to using principles like invading someone's personal space. So if I have somebody stand up in front of a chair, can you be my guinea pig? And we don't know each other as well as we do, and I just come up and go like this, the odds are she's going to try and step back. And if I'm doing it while I'm saying, be healed, okay, that's not a city. It may be a little shitty, but it isn't a city. And I have experienced cities. I was not the actor, I was not the city org, but I've experienced my mind being read. I've experienced people knowing things about me and my family that they should have no reason or way to know. And so I'm a believer. I can't explain it. And I don't believe that explaining it is the point. Nor is it something I particularly crave, because I don't know about you, but I've met some people that I do not want to know what's going on in here. And so, So now we go back to this ascension. Okay, to me, Jesus feeds the 5,000, yeah, that can happen. You don't have to be with me on that. I've gone back and forth on that over my life. Seems reasonable enough to me. If people can do things like be in two places at one time, whipping up a little food doesn't seem so hard to me. Does Jesus walk through a locked wall and appear in the room with the upper disciples post-resurrection? Absolutely. No problem with that. It may be a spiritual appearance, it may be a physical appearance, I don't know. Does Jesus turn into a helium balloon and disappear over the apex of my Nana and Grandpa's house? For me, no. For me, that's a story, and first of all, technically, we're in the church, in the Christian church here, we're kind of moving towards, we had Easter, right? And now today's Thursday actually was the Ascension. This is Ascension Sunday. Next Sunday is Pentecost, and it's easy to start thinking that this was all over in just a few weeks. The problem is that the resurrected Jesus appeared to Paul a couple years later. So it's reasonable to assume that this stuff was spread out a little more than it is in the Gospels. And one of the theories is it's lined up like this in the Gospels so that it could coincide with the progression of the Hebrew Bible, which is really interesting to most people. But anyway, what happens if you have a charismatic leader who never seems to go away? Do you know that when a pastor of a Christian church retires, they're supposed to get out of town? And the reason they're supposed to get out of town is that if they keep coming back, everybody gets stuck. They're not going to accept the new pastor because, Pastor Sally's still in town, and she was so wonderful, and she baptized my children and buried my parents and did my wedding and all that good stuff. And that's good, sound, solid reasoning. Okay, Jesus dies, he's resurrected, he's appearing. What's the point in doing anything? Jesus will handle it. All right? So at some point, whatever the mechanics of those appearances were, whatever was going on, it doesn't really matter. At some point, there has to be this handing over of responsibility. And this marks that point. Which brings me to yesterday. Yesterday, we scattered the ashes of my sister-in-law who died in 2009. Right? I always get that mixed up. And she was a forensic nurse and did a lot of training with sexual assault nurse examiners, and so there's days and events and things named after her, and yet I think there too, I mean, I see similarities, not that I'm claiming she was Jesus, but she was far too honorary. But there was somebody who, once she was gone, and obviously not coming back, now other people were able to step forward who had kind of held back and laid back because she was leading the cause and doing all this stuff. They were now able to come into their own, really forced by circumstance to come into their own. And it's interesting that now, 5 years later, her ashes are finally scattered, and I think that symbolizes, well, not scattered exactly, gone for a swim, but it symbolizes another step in that moving on. If Jesus doesn't ascend, everything just sort of dies. Because when he's killed, they're all like, oh, holy cow, it's all done, what are we going to do now? And they all kind of go home. And then Jesus starts appearing, and they say, well, gee, maybe there is something more to this. But there's something about us, because we don't believe in ourselves, it's really the truth, that will make us lay back as long as there's somebody around who we believe is better at doing whatever it is than we are. And so if we had somebody train us at our job, we'll always look to them until they move on, or retire, or get transferred to another department. If we have had a charismatic spiritual leader in our histories, for some of us it was a childhood pastor, not for me, but if we had one, or a spiritual teacher, we can fall back into that place where we say, you know, we can't really do this. We'll just let them do it because they're so much better at it than we are. And we don't believe in ourselves. And so one of the things very practically that Jesus' ascension shows us about our lives today is that good leaders train their replacements starting on the first day. Effective leaders don't hold what they have, they give it away, and then they encourage people to use it. Now, of course, that's a direct conflict with a lot of ego needs. If I train somebody too well, they might be better at it than I am, and I might become obsolete. One of the advantages of aging is that the older we get, the more becoming obsolete seems like a pretty attractive proposition. You know? We get to the place where we just say, God, please somebody take this from me, and then I can go and enjoy life. So I think we make a mistake very often, and I'm as prone to it as anybody else, when there's spiritual stories about things that we can't exactly explain, or we can't completely explain. We get caught up in trying to explain it. But explaining it isn't really the point. It's like taking your car to the mechanic. You don't really understand what they did in all likelihood, although you might. But what you really care about is that you can drive away. And so in our daily life, we're good with that. The mechanic does something mysterious, the car starts, we're happy. Yeah, we don't need to know. I don't know, should I drive it? I'm going to, how does this work? But in spiritual stuff, we get bogged down there. And I think for some people who make a living trying to explain that stuff, it's probably fascinating to sit around and have those conversations. But for most of us, it's better to decide what the message is. If my car goes to the mechanic because I never checked the oil and the engine blew up, the message is, check your oil. You don't have to understand what he did to put the new engine in. Jesus ascends, the message is a message of empowerment. Don't look to other people to do things, because the truth is, you already have everything you need inside of you to go ahead and do it. And Jesus said that very overtly, and every other responsible spiritual teacher has said that very overtly in every tradition. You have what you need inside you, whether that's Buddha nature, whether it's the Holy Spirit, whatever you think it is, it's there. Now we may need help accessing it and actualizing it. But if we never try, all we've done is sit in the backyard watching that helium balloon float over the house, and we might never get over it. Amen.